Okay. Good afternoon. Oh, if you came to the morning session, you know how this is supposed to work. Good afternoon. That's a little better. We're going to practice that throughout the next 3 days. My name is Jason Buffington. I'm a senior product manager in the management and security division at Microsoft. My primary area of focus is data protection. I've been in backup for one company or another for about 20 years. I spent 5 years now with DPM since the original V1 product shipped. I spent 9 years with DoubleTake. Anyone using replication? Okay, just a couple. 4 years with Cheyenne doing ArcServe before CA acquired them. Any ArcServe people in the? Sorry about that. Never mind. Sorry. And I've been with some channel partners along the way. Over the next 3 days, we have 3 sessions that are being done around DPM and data protection. You are in the first one, Server 215, Technical Introduction to DPM 2010. And then tomorrow, we're going to be over in the Office track and talking about protecting applications, specifically SQL and SharePoint, and I'll probably sneak a little bit of Exchange in there as well. And then we're going to come back into Server 315 and talk about disaster recovery and virtualization protection. So a little bit of data protection every day this week. And I do have a couple copies of a new data protection book that just came out. So if you have some really, really cool and compelling questions, you might just earn a copy. All right. So let's kind of jump into Technical Introduction to DPM. One of the first things we wanted to talk about was, why did Microsoft build a backup product? Right? So before DPM came around, there's probably nobody in this room that didn't already have some kind of backup, right? So this is not a new kind of thing. So, and in fact, arguably, if you look back at what Microsoft used to do, and I say that in the third person because I wasn't there at the time, kind of idea, you could kind of say from 1993 when NT first came out through about 2005, Microsoft had this idea that they build the platform, they build the app, someone else backs it up. Is that about right for a lot of us for a long time? Not including the NT backup utility. All right. You could make the same claim, someone else would make it highly available. You can make the same claim, someone else would take it off site. You know, the whole idea was Microsoft was primarily focused around the platform. Here's the challenge. What eventually came back was we had to ask ourselves the question, who's going to support it? Now, I want to kind of take you through a few pain points around what was DPM trying to really solve. And then we'll actually get into more of the deep technical as far as what is DPM and especially the 2010 release. So this is not to pick on Exchange. I have equal bashing slides for other platforms as well. But so here's one of the things that we often heard from you. You told us that Exchange 2003, when you were looking at backing up and recovering Exchange 2003, you said, hey, no problem. I can back that up all day long. You also told us that when it came time for you to upgrade to Exchange 2007, you said, you know, my backup solution works pretty good for standalone Exchange 2007. Sometimes it kind of freaks out on CCR and SCR, and there's actually a couple folks out there that still don't back up SCR well today. And then, of course, a lot of us are now excitedly moving towards Exchange 2010, to which some of you have actually told us, you know, yeah, the backup solution I'm currently using doesn't work quite right with standalone yet, and we're not supporting DAG. Does that, actually, I won't ask for a show of hands, but you get the idea as far as one of the challenges there. Now, not just to pick on Exchange, we also often heard from our customers, hey, you know what, I can back up SQL Server all day long. That works great. Backing up content databases inside of a SharePoint farm, which, by the way, happens to be SQL Server databases, I sometimes have challenges with that. When you kind of put all this together, this is what we heard. We heard you tell us, I want the new capabilities of whatever that new platform is, but my current backup solution doesn't work with it yet, so I'm going to wait to deploy whatever that is until my backup solution catches up. And candidly, Microsoft doesn't want you to wait, right? We don't want you to have deployment blockers as far as why you can or cannot take advantage of those new platforms. So that was one of the challenges that we were trying to address with DPM, was making sure that you didn't have a reason to wait, that you weren't blocked from a legacy perspective. Here's probably the more compelling reason, and this one hopefully rings home with many of you in here. So what I've got are a variety of Microsoft platforms on the left-hand side. Some Exchange, some SQL, some SharePoint, some Windows virtualization, some file services, some desktops, Just a nice little mix of all the core stuff that you might find in infrastructure. Here's what we often saw in your environments. We saw that in many cases you were using one vendor's technology for nightly tape backup. Over the course of time, you had delivered a second technology for using disk-to-disk protection, usually as an accelerator to your tape, or perhaps because your tape-based workload didn't work well, so you were doing it to disk before you went to tape. And then lastly, perhaps you were using even a third kind of technology to actually replicate the data off-site to another location. Does that sound about right to anyone in here? Heads nodding, just a couple? Okay, and if you came to the early session, you know how this works. This is not head nodding. It's also, by the way, a little early. The carbon hydrates haven't quite kicked in yet. So here's the problem. When you have this many kind of different data protection technologies, and in each case you were putting these data protection technologies on each production server, occasionally they'd step on each other, right? And then whose fault is it? Then who are you going to actually blame or request support from? That's the right way of saying it. Let's talk about support for a second. Let me share my own personal example with you, and you guys tell me if it doesn't resonate with you just a little bit. Have you ever been in a situation where, I'm going to pick on Exchange a little bit, Exchange has been working just fine, all of a sudden something goes wrong. So you go and you do your restore from your last good set of tapes or disks or whatever you got. Exchange doesn't come back up again. So you call the backup vendor, and he looks through your logs, and sure enough, the backup logs look good, and the restore log looks good. Backup guy says, I think I'm off the hook. I did my part. You're restored. It must be Exchange's fault. Right? So you call Exchange, Microsoft, and you talk to them for a few minutes, and after some best effort support, they finally come back to you and say, I'm not sure you've got good data. And you're kind of stuck, right? That was actually the bigger challenge that Microsoft wanted to try to address, is to not have you get stuck somewhere in a supportability gap between what the backup and recovery vendors are doing as far as their process versus what the application can actually sustain and support. Now, by the way, I'm not going to take a show of hands on who actually ever got stuck, because that would be a little bit awkward, and besides, we're filming this session. So anyway, so those were the big problems that we were trying to address. And DPM was not actually the first way we tried to solve it. We actually tried to solve it first with a technology called volume shadow copy services. Show of hands, who here knows VSS? Okay, good. All right. By the way, I'm pretty sure none of you work for a backup vendor, because it's a lot less hands that go up when they do that. Here's the trick. So VSS is plumbing, right? And I'm trying to kind of catch the room up so we're looking at it the same way. VSS is plumbing that basically says this is how the backup technologies and the workload should be talking to each other in order to get a successful backup in a wholly supported way. So we put all the backup vendors in one category, all the workloads in the other categories, and this is how it works. So basically, some of us are in here already know this, there is such a thing called a VSS writer, which is what the application does. And it's basically the VSS writer says, this is how I'd like to get backed up. On the other side, we teach the backup vendors how to write a VSS requester. And the VSS requester is the agent that says, this is how I'd like to do a backup. And if both sides do their parts right and they talk through the VSS plumbing, then basically it builds a bridge and everything gets supported and backed up well. And how cool is that? Here's the problem. A lot of backup vendors don't use VSS. Okay? Main reason why, by the way, and as I mentioned, I've been in backup a long time, most of it not with Microsoft. Challenge is that if you build this general purpose backup architecture, you got a back-end engine, got a ubiquitous agent technology that goes out to all the front-end boxes. If you build this general architecture that can basically back up anything from an iPod to a mainframe, it's really hard to take advantage of best-of-breed functionality on a per-workload basis. So for one reason or another, a lot of the backup technologies actually aren't able to fully leverage volume shadow copy services, which unfortunately means we still have a supportability gap. All right, so fast forward a little bit, circa about calendar 2005. This is the problem that we were having, was how do we still make sure there is a wholly supported scenario here and at least one backup vendor who absolutely guarantees in all scenarios that they're going to be using VSS as part of the plumbing. Only way we can guarantee that, of course, is to write our own product. So that's kind of how DPM came in the picture. Now, fast forward 5 more years, Data Protection Manager 2010. It released to manufacturing in April of this year. It's been on the Microsoft price list and is generally available in market since about middle of June. And so we're about, 3 months, 2.5 months into the picture. Let's talk about what DPM really does. what we're going to do is we're going to put an agent on each of the production workloads. So all the boxes that you see here, by the way, it is an agent. Okay, one. It's not, there's technically a 64-bit version and a 32-bit version, but here's the fun part. You don't have to figure out, oh, I need this many SQL agents and this many Exchange agents and this many SharePoint agents, and by the way, I'm going to need to bring out a big old spreadsheet to figure out how many of each SKU that I need and talk to the acquisition department, and I'll need a matrix and maybe a pivot table. And has anyone in here ever done that for your backup software? Right? Okay, so here it is. One agent goes out everywhere. The behavior of the agent will vary based on what you're backing up. But it's the same bits. Push it out through group policy. Push it out through Active Directory, through System Center Configuration Manager, System Center Essentials. Just put the agent out there. Then what happens is that agent will talk to whatever VSS-based workloads are on that box, and then it'll start capturing byte or block level changes within the data files up to every 15 minutes. So we're going to take those granular changes and we're going to lay them down on top of on the DPM 2010 server. It's going to hold a live copy of your data, something that we call a replica. So native NTFS partition, the data is held in a native state. What I mean by that is that when I'm protecting SQL Server, I get real MDF files. When I'm protecting Exchange, there's real EDBs. When I'm protecting a virtual machine, I can see real VHDs. The files are held in a native state. And then after that, then we're going to hold previous points in time on disk. That's going to give me fast recovery options. I'm going to also be able to lay that data directly to tape. That gives me a long-term retention strategy. And by the way, what I mean by this is there is no third-party tape requirement here. So if the only workloads that you're primarily focused on are on that left-hand side, then DPM will displace most of the other Windows-centric backup technologies that you might be considering today. And then lastly, I can replicate the data from one DPM server which is on-premise to another DPM server which is off-premise and do a disaster recovery scenario. And I'm doing all of this with a single set of binaries in the production server and with a single UI to manage the entire environment. We doing okay so far? Head still nodding. You'll get used to it. It's okay. All right, so that's what DPM really looks like. Now, this is a really wordy marketing definition of what DPM really is. You can read it at your leisure as you like. I want to kind of draw out a few things for you that are important to think about. Primarily, it's around unified server and client to disk, tape, and cloud, meaning it's one agent, multiple repositories, one pane of glass, and it's a unified experience. It works pretty much similarly the same way, Okay, that may not have been the best choice of words, but it works kind of like automagically the same, depending on, regardless of which workload. It is designed as best of breed from Microsoft for Windows. So, no, we do not do Mac. No, we do not do Linux, or mainframes for that matter. Okay, really, because honestly, if we started doing a heterogeneous architecture, we would probably have some of the same challenges that the other heterogeneous architectures have. We are focused on best for Windows. A couple more things. Obviously, we talked about this a little bit already around the idea of best protection, most supportable restore. Making sure there's no supportability gap between the backup and recovery process and the workloads themselves that you rely on. And then lastly, of course, this is part of System Center's mantra, the idea of scalable, reliable, manageable, and cost-effective. And that's about as many ubbles as I could squeeze into the last line of a single English sentence, so we'll keep on going. All right, so DPM 2010. Main areas that we're going to talk about is kind of highlights for today, and I'm going to draw you some other sessions that happen throughout the week. Around application and file server protection, we'll talk a little bit about Microsoft virtualization technologies, what we're doing around Windows Client, disaster recovery, and then what we've done in 2010, particularly around enterprise suitability, scalability, and reliability. More abilities to go with the ubbles that we had on the last slide. All right, so what does DPM actually back up? Basic common list here. It's pretty much everything that's Windows-based is either a server or a desktop OS, which is currently available in market today, or even in extended support. Everything from XP Service Pack 2 all the way up through Win 7. Everything from Windows Server 2003 all the way up through Windows Server 2008 R2. Here's a lot of workloads, and it's most of the stuff we already talked about. It's the SQL and the Exchange and the SharePoint and Dynamics, and I'm not exactly sure how the font got really, really tiny on some of those. One thing I want to draw your eye to, the lines in yellow, those are actually the only new workloads that were delivered in DPM 2010. Everything else you should see on that list was also available for protection in DPM 2007 Service Pack 1. The punchline here is that DPM 2010 wasn't necessarily about radically broadening the what we protect. It was really about improving and enhancing the how we protect it, and really more about the enterprise experience and about reliability and suitability for larger kinds of environments. So we're going to talk about some of the feature level enhancements as we go through. I'd love to talk about a lot more of them, but we actually only have about an hour or so. All right. So a couple highlights. As far as what did we do around file and application support, I already mentioned Windows Server 2003 all the way through 2008 R2. One of the big things we added or have maintained support for and enriched is self-service restore by your end users. I actually caught a couple tweets on that this morning when we, after the foundation session on System Center. Yeah, so any end user, non-technical as they may be, can right-click on a file on their desktop, either using Windows Explorer or Microsoft Office, and they can get any previous version of that file back, and the versions of those files are what's being held on the DPM server. That is built in today. By the way, little data point here. Between Windows Explorer and Microsoft Office, that's probably what your non-technical users use to screw up the file to begin with. Okay? So right after they hit save instead of save as, and they went, oh! Everyone do that with me really quick. Go, oh! Okay. Appreciate the people in the front. We're going to work on y'all later. All right. But here's the thing. We've all done that, right? We've all had that sinking feeling when we did something just really, really bad, and then you get to call the help desk, and you get to wait a couple hours until it comes back again, and they fix it for you. Right. So instead of doing that, an end user can right-click on a file and just say previous version. They can roll it directly back to where it came from again. All right. SQL Server. We actually gave DBAs a very similar functionality, and we're really excited about that. So new in DPM 2010, and you can see this tomorrow when you come to the office session, DBAs can now do their own restores of databases, either directly from the SQL Server Management Console or even from the DBA's laptop. Okay, some of the other things we added for SQL Server was the ability to protect an entire instance of SQL. Who in here has line of business applications where SQL databases get spawned or created as part of a workflow? Okay, a couple. All right. So for those of you that have that kind of experience, you know that if you were using DPM 2007, every time you created new databases, you either had to have a stored procedure to go and create protection for it, or you were constantly going into the DPM UI to go and actually say, oh, got to create another one. Oh, got to add that one for protection, etc. Now you can actually just protect an instance of SQL, and any new DBs that get created within that instance will automatically get protected. One of the big things, and you're going to see a theme about this as we kind of go through our time today, is a lot of what was in DPM 2010 is really around auto this and auto that. A lot of auto grow, auto heal, auto fix, auto allocate, a lot of auto. One of them that we did was around auto allocation of storage. And associated with that is some really big scale improvements. A single DPM 2007 server, the last generation, DPM 2007 server, you could protect, depending on the size of them, maybe 200, 250 databases-ish, and then you kind of maxed out that DPM box. Now, there's a lot of explanation as to why, but basically what we've done instead is we've changed how we actually store that data. And now, instead of capping out around 200 or 250 data sources, if you're taking notes, here's the list. A single DPM 2010 server, this is your scalability limits, a single DPM 2010 server will protect over 2,000 SQL databases. It'll protect over 40 terabytes of Exchange, over 25 terabyte SharePoint farms with over 1 million line item objects, over 100 production servers, or over 1,000 Windows clients per DPM 2010 server. Made a lot of enhancements in 2010 around enterprise scalability, and some of that included how we actually store and change the data. All right, and then some of the other things, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later, is around the fact that a DPM server can recover SQL 2005 data to a SQL 2008 box, which is kind of cool for some interesting migration scenarios. All right, speeding up a little bit, SharePoint 2010 support was added, including, by the way, the protection of new storage farms and new storage databases. Also, and if you're a SharePoint person, you ought to be really happy about this. Feel free to high-five your neighbor. There's no more requirement for a recovery farm on a SharePoint 2010 environment. And since they don't need one, neither do we. So that's actually a very cool thing for recovery scenarios. And then, of course, for Exchange, adding support for Exchange 2010, as well as the advanced scenarios like DAG. As I mentioned, OFS 204, I think it's tomorrow late morning, like 10-ish or something. We're going to be talking specifically around application-based protection, so hopefully you'll come to that session. All right, virtualization, one of the more exciting areas that the DPM is involved with. In DPM 2007, we could do host-based backups of VMs, and we could protect Hyper-V clusters, and we could support quick migration. Here's some of the things that we added for DPM 2010. And by the way, we've got a whole session on this. It's SVR 315, which we'll be doing on Wednesday, I think actually in here. Host-level backup is supported. Live migration is supported. Being able to recover VMs to different hosts than where they came from, as well as things like item-level recovery. So, and you're going to have to come back on Wednesday to find out about this. But basically, I can back up a VM as a whole, and yet I can restore individual items from within a VM-based backup and drop them out without ever having an agent inside inside the guest. It's a little bit of a hat trick, but you come back on Wednesday, I'll show you how it works. All right. So this session is meant to be really, really heavy on demo. I want to give you guys a good flavor for what the product looks like. So what I thought we'd start off with is just let's get your first DPM server built. Now, to do that, what we're going to do is I've gone over to one of my setup machines. Now, here's what I thought I would do. The DPM setup UI takes about 40 minutes or so. You're going to go through about 4 or 5 questions up front. And then we're going to watch the scroll bar go across the screen for the next 40 minutes. And then I realized, wait, you guys are going to do evals. And that's not going to work. So you don't want to watch the scroll bar go across the screen for 40 minutes. And I run out of narration as far as, and look, it goes again. And anyway, it'd be bad. So we're going to use screenshots for the setup. And then we'll be using live bits for the rest of the setups going on. So just please remember that later and say, he used screenshots, and it'll be bad. All right, so we're going to start off. Basic setup wizard. It's going to go through and it's going to find out there's some components that may not be installed. So after you install those, the minimum requirements, and most of them will actually have a hyperlink on them, it'll come back and it'll do a pre-flight check. It'll check the memory. It'll check the CPU. It'll check whether it has free storage space. It'll check whether or not it has PowerShell installed. Most of the components, if it doesn't have them, it'll automatically install them for you. Then after that, it's going to start asking you some really hard questions like, what's your name? Right? What company are you with? Hopefully you're taking notes. All right. So then after that, now it gets a little bit more interesting. It's going to ask you, where do you want to put DPM's UI? This next part in the middle, you kind of want to pay attention to. DPM 2010 ships with a copy of SQL Server 2008 Standard Edition. Okay? Now, I will tell you, the EULA does lock it down. No, it's not buy DPM, get SQL free. That's not how this works. Okay? But DPM does require SQL Server Standard Edition because we use it as our index, our scheduler, as well as our reporting services, which is why it's standard and not MSD. All right, you can choose to just, and the installer is actually in the DPM bits, so it'll just install SQL for you if you let it, which, by the way, is the default behavior. Or you can choose to use a separate SQL server on a different machine. If you do it on a separate machine, you actually do have to pay for it, so be mindful of that. All right, so in this case, we're going to go ahead and take the free copy of SQL that came with our server. We'll go ahead and install a password. I always like 10 dots as my password. I think that's very secure. Of course, you're going to want to sign up for the Customer Experience Improvement Program. All right. And we're done. Okay. That really is the install, guys. All you really need to know is where you're going to put the bits, what instance SQL are you using, and then from there, the scroll bar just kind of flies across the screen. Not only does it install SQL, it installs the additional components, even service packs it for you. Okay, that is the install. You start with this basic machine, and after you've done all these pieces, what you've got is a functional standing DPM server. Now, it's not ready to protect your environment yet, but it does give you it is actually ready to go other than that. Now, there's a couple other things we have to do in order to actually get this to where we can actually have a live environment. So I've got this standing DPM server, and by the way, DPM 2010 sits on top of any Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2 class machine. Has to be 64-bit, just as an FYI. The 64-bit actually helps us for scaling. The Windows Server 2008 also gives us some new functions within NTFS and VSS. So those are the minimum requirements for it. If you do have a DPM 2007 install, which is on Windows Server 2008 64-bit, yes, you can do an in-place upgrade. There are some pieces and parts you have to move around, but we have an advisor that will actually walk you through it. All right, so now I've got this functional box. There's a couple things I've got to do. I've got to get agents on the production servers. I've got to add some disk, and I've got to add some tape, and then we're actually ready to get into some live business. So when I first want to do an agent, what I'll start off with is I'm going to go ahead and do what's called a push agent. So the first time you do a POC, the first time you're just testing DPM 2010, basically what will happen is you'll bring up this UI where you said I want to install agents, and you're basically going to find a whole list of all the servers. Let's see if this works. All the servers on the left-hand window are in your domain, and you'll pick one or more of them and drag them to the right-hand window. Okay? Once we've done that, you'll need an admin level credential. And then, now, you might want to pay attention on this. This very helpful UI is going to offer to reboot your servers for you. Okay? And if you really want to check how responsive your help desk is, try it. All right. Now, a couple things to note. The next button is grayed out. Okay? So you actually cannot go next, 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 uh-oh. Okay? Instead, you do actually have to make a plausible choice. Here's the fun part that you need to be aware of. Most of the time, you'll never reboot your boxes. If you're a DPM 2007 person, you know that pretty much every time we did anything with the agent, you had to reboot your servers to have the new version of the agent take effect. That is not true in DPM 2010. We're actually using a different architecture for the filter driver. In almost all cases, you never need to reboot your servers as part of a DPM agent install. There's only a couple reasons why you might. The most common one is, and the reason it's here is because the most common one is when you're deploying a DPM 2010 agent onto a box which is currently being protected by DPM 2007. Because you need to reboot the box one more time to get the other agent off. Afterwards, the 2010 agent just goes on pretty nicely. All right, so one way or the other, you have gone ahead and said yes, you're pushing the agent out to all the boxes. Look how fast that install is. That goes really quick, doesn't it? All right. One of the other things that we added, there we go. One of the other things that we added was in DPM 2010, you can also now protect non-domain joined machines. Okay? So that means that when, because what we heard pretty clearly was in a lot of your environments, you said, you know what, I got about 100 boxes, 98 of them are in the domain, 2 of them are not. And because I can't use you on those 2, I'm not ready to use you for the other 98. So we want to make sure that was, again, not a deployment blocker. So in 2010, you actually can do that. I don't have time to kind of walk you through the whole process today, but basically, for those of you that are familiar with DPM 2007, there is a utility called set DPM server. And normally you use that to handle all your firewall handling properties because you can tell it the name of the server and then it goes and sets the firewall rules for you. We've added some additional parameters to that now allows you to create a local account within that machine, which is what the DPM server and agent will then use for communication, so that you can then do non-domain joined protection within that environment. All right. So that's it with the screens. Which mouse? There we go. All right, so now what I want to do is actually take you through a few more pieces of what's out there. So I've got agents in all the boxes. Now it's time to go ahead and set up some basic protection. And to do that, here's all the machines that are in my live environment. And I've got quite a range of different kinds of machines that are out there. Let me bring this up so it's a little bit easier for folks in the back and at home to see. So let's start off with the file server. Basic introduction. Here's the part you have to remember. Remember, we put the same binary, the same DPM agent, on all the boxes. The behavior of the agent will change depending on what it sees on the production servers. So, when I just see a generic file server just running Windows, these are the default options that every server has. I can see any shares that are on the box. So let's go ahead and grab a couple of those. I can go old school. I can see the volumes that are on that box. So I can grab my C drive and my D drive, and I can go and just grab some directories from there. New in 2010 is I can also do bare metal recovery or system state directly from here. Okay, so this is standard regardless of what workload I'm seeing. Now let me show you what else happens when I use the same agent on a different server. If I open up Exchange server, I can still see the shares, I can still see the volumes, I can still see system state and bare metal recovery, but because VSS has an Exchange VSS writer, Exchange has an Exchange VSS writer, it's registered there so I can see Exchange. In this case, I can pick storage groups. So let me go grab a storage group from there. If I'm on an Exchange 2010 server, I'll see Exchange 2010 databases. Same idea. Now, if I go down to SQL, if I open up a SQL server, there are my shares, there are my volumes, there's my system state, and again, I see here that I'm running SQL as part of my environment. There are the two instances of SQL that I have in my environment. I'll go ahead and open up, say, the accounting one. Payroll, that's a good database. We want to protect payroll. That's a good idea. And customers. Customers are important too. All right, so we're picking a couple different databases from a couple different instances, and in fact, we'll do this demo at about 1/3 speed when we talk about it for in the application session tomorrow. Now, if I open up SharePoint, lo and behold, look at this. I've got SQL because SharePoint has a SQL Server backend on it. So I could go ahead and open it up and say, look, there's my SharePoint instance of SQL. That's what I want to get. You'd be wrong. Well, not wrong, but let me explain to you a more optimal way to have the same experience. Okay. Instead, what you want to do is you want to open up SharePoint as a logical object, and here's the fun part. You can back up the entire logical farm in a single mouse click. Regardless of how many content databases, forgetting about where all the other parts are, it's one mouse click, and we go figure out where all those pieces and parts are. All right. So I'll go ahead and grab the farm. Now, by the way, I can't actually magically tell you how that works, but you'll have to come to the office session tomorrow, and we can take you into more detail. All right. This is my important data. Now, remember I said in the earlier diagram, I said, you can protect DPM data to disk, to tape, or to cloud. Who in here runs in a heterogeneous environment? Raise your hands. It's okay. All right, so you've got servers other than Windows, maybe about 25, maybe 30% of the room. So if you're in a heterogeneous environment, you've got servers other than Windows, you probably already have a heterogeneous backup product, right? You've got NetBackup, you've got Tivoli, you've got Networker, maybe you've got ArcServe. So if that's what you're running as part of your environment, you already have one set of tapes that goes across your entire heterogeneous enterprise. And politically, maybe not technically, politically, maybe that's still what you need to keep on doing. And that's okay. Turn off our tape. There you go. Now you can protect the production Windows servers to DPM disk, and then you can protect your DPM disk to network or tape. That means you'll continue to have a complete set of tapes across your heterogeneous enterprise. It just, oh, by the way, means that you still have a one throat to choke all Microsoft backup recovery experience for the Windows workloads. Because what many of you have already told us is even in the largest of heterogeneous enterprises, if you're a really large heterogeneous environment, there's probably someone in your environment who manages SQL, and there may be Linux servers on one rack and other boxes in another rack, but this rack that he owns, it's all Windows, and it's all SQL, and that's what he's living on. And that person normally would like that one throat to choke experience. And then, oh, by the way, you can back it up to your network or tape, whatever you want. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn our tape back on just because it makes the demo a little cooler. All right, we're going to kind of fly through a couple of defaults, and then I'm going to wrap up with some of the other things that are in 2010. Come back to the other sessions. We'll spend more time on each UI. But some of the things that we've added were around support for Exchange 2010, including DAG scenarios, and offloading ESC util, which is a rather I/O-intensive process that we actually run your ESC util and your ESC.dll on the DPM copy of the data. And then afterwards, we just let the Exchange server know, hey, you just ran ESC util, and here's how it went, so that it can do some old defrag and cleanup and maintenance, etc. With DAG, you need to decide whether or not you want to do full backups or copies. We support for that. Most people can't spell DAG. All right, so here's where it gets kind of interesting. Disk-to-disk protection from DPM is 2 business-driven questions, plus a couple options. First business-driven question is, how long do I want to keep my data on disk? 5 days seems short. We're going to say 14 days on disk. And the second question, how often? That's it. We're going to say 14 days every 15 minutes. So for the next 14 days, I'm going to have all my data live on disk including multiple iterations for every 15-minute point in time for as much as the application or workload will support it. And I've got some tuning options I can do down here, but for this first introduction, we'll take the defaults. Co-location is a new feature that allows for, it's one of the pieces of magic pixie fairy dust that we use in order to really get those large enterprise numbers that we talked about a little bit earlier. Check out my blog, and there's a really long article that talks about how co-location works. This one down here, this is good stuff. If you're a 2007 customer in here, you're going to like this. Basically, in DPM 2007, if you had, say, 1 gig of data, and you protected it to about 1.1 gig worth of free space, and then you grew the production data about 1.5, and so you had to go back and add more storage, and then you grew it to 2 gigs, and you had to come back and add more storage, and you see there's a recurring pattern here, right? Okay, so MSIT, Microsoft's own IT department, said this was the #1 complaint they had with DPM 2007 because it felt like you were constantly having to go back and manage that relationship. And in DPM 2007, we basically had this idea of, well, just because you've got extra storage in that DPM server, you wouldn't want us to auto-grow that, because then what if some crazy person decided to start putting data on the server, and then we'd use it all up over here, and it would use up all the disk. And what you told us about 2 years ago was, yes, that's what I want, because you stop protecting when you run out of space. So yeah, so now it's checkbox. Yes, when your production data source grows, we will automatically add more disk over there. All right. So that was disk. That's it. How long do I want to keep it? How often do I want to do it? Tape works exactly the same way. How long do I want to keep it? Let's say 5 years. How often do I want to do it? Weekly. And it's okay to do weekly tape backups because remember, you're going to disk every 15 minutes. Right? Most of your recoveries are actually going to come from a much more superior media than cellophane tape wrapped across 2 spindles. All right. And then I also have a little tuning options. Just like I had for disk, I have tuning options for tape. Which tape drives or libraries or changers do I want to use? Do I want to compress the tapes? Do I want to encrypt the tapes, or neither? I'll say next. Lastly, I want to find out whether or not I want to do that initial baseline. I want to get all that original data from the production servers over to the DPM server. Do I do that now? Just like big X copy on steroids, right? Do I do that later, hopefully after hours? Maybe it'll be done by morning. Or do I do it manually? Who in here has remote offices on the wrong side of a thin connection? Okay, this feature is for you. Okay, basically what this means is I've got a branch office. I can take that data at that branch office. I can get it portable. USB hard drive, tape backup, DVD-R, whatever. Get it portable. Ship it from that branch office location over to where your DPM server is and drop it in. And that's what the word manually means. What you're doing is you are manually seeding that initial data set. Because when you then light it up in about 2 screens, and let's go ahead and show you that so you can see it, what will happen is it'll do a block level compare. And it'll figure out only which blocks have changed over the 2 or 3 days while that data was in transit. Catch just those few blocks up, and now you're over again. So you don't have to do that baseline across the wrong side of a thin connection. All right, this last one. Just quick show of hands. Who in here is a DPM 2007 user today? Okay, good. Maybe 40% of the room. Thank you very much. All right, so if you're a DPM 2007 customer, you may just want to hug the guy next to you on this one, because here's how this works. DPM 2007, we exposed a lot of things in volume shadow copy services, including some errors. And any time that VSS would freak out in any way at all, DPM would say, I'm not sure you've got good data anymore. I'm just going to stop until you do a consistency check. It's kind of how it happened. And 40% of the room, out of the 40% that said yes, I'm thinking 38% said, yep, that's how it happens. Right? Now, in DPM 2007, we said, well, you wouldn't want us to try to auto-compare and resolve that because that might take some additional network impact if you do that. And of course, 2 years ago, you said, yes, that's exactly what I want because you stop backing up until you do the consistency check. So yes, please do that. And so we do. It's checkbox. So you turn on this checkbox, and now basically DPM 2010 is auto-healing for almost all of those storage things. Again, I'm going to close my eyes. You guys hug if you want, and we'll keep on. Okay, that doesn't work here. All right, so that's it. So we'll go ahead and say complete, say yes. Now it's going to go ahead and auto-allocate some additional storage for those things I haven't been protecting from before. and this will take just a few minutes to kind of catch up again. All right, let me take you through what's left in DPM 2010. We've gone through setup. We've gone through protection. All right, a few more things that are out there for 2010. Client-based support. Who came to the foundation session first thing this morning? Okay, good. Maybe about 20, 25%. All right, so if you came to that session, you got to see a little bit of that demo already. But basically, the same way we've been protecting servers for the last 5 years, in DPM 2010, we added support for client. So we'll also protect machines that are running Windows XP, Windows Vista, and Windows 7. Now, if you're a 2007 customer, you might be thinking to yourself, wait, we had a client agent in DPM 2007, and you did. We just treated your clients like servers, right? We assume things like your client machine was always connected to the corporate network 24 hours a day so I could reach out every 15 minutes. Right? If you actually try that with a laptop, about 29 days out of 30, it'll give you error messages because your laptop's not on the corporate network. It's at home. Right? So we really wanted to redesign the experience around the disconnected client scenario. I mentioned before what the scaling is, but here's a couple things to think about. So we're protecting only the unique data. So you can pick things like My Documents or Desktop. You can exclude things like music, pictures, video. You can give users flexibility like being able to choose additional directories or not above and beyond what the corporate policy is. Here's the fun part, and I don't have a chance to do this on the session today. The backups you define on desktop for client protection work whether you are on CorpNet or off. Now, if you're actually on a direct access or VPN connection, that technically means you're on CorpNet, and so it keeps on backing up to the DPM server. What I'm talking about is my particular laptop hasn't seen the corporate network in about 2 weeks, about 12 days, I think. My backup policy from Microsoft says I'm backing up 3 times a day, 8 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. Those backups are still happening even though I'm not connected to anything. It's actually using a small private area of the local hard drive, and it's still retaining points in time. So I can actually recover my PowerPoint to what it looked like last week, even though I haven't been on any backup segment in the last 12 days. Now, when I get back on CorpNet, I'm going to be logging on sometime next week. Then the next backup happens after that. We'll be backing up back to the Microsoft IT DPM servers on the back end. But I actually have backup and recovery capabilities while I'm online or offline using the DPM client. All right. A couple other things. So normally when we talk about DPM, we talk about all the production servers, and we pull it on clients, and pulling it back to a single DPM server, like what I've got here. One of the other things that's in 2010 is the ability to protect from one DPM server to another DPM server for disaster recovery. Now, a couple things we added in the 2010 product specifically around this was single-click failover and failback. So what that means is when my primary DPM server fails, or has change management, the secondary DPM server can continue to protect the production servers. Okay, so it has resiliency of the protection and the recovery experience. Also, if you've kind of been glazed over because of the carbs from lunch for the whole day, please write this down. If you want to do one thing to kind of save yourself some money this year, do your backups from a secondary DPM server. Okay, and the reason I tell you that is because I haven't found any international regulation yet that talks about data preservation and the requirement for off-site tapes, that this doesn't fit without paying for the guy in the truck to come lose your tapes for you. Okay, instead of actually having a manual process of doing a tape backup and then putting them in a little cartridge case and having someone take them away and hopefully they'll come back someday, instead of doing that, run a second DPM server any place else you want. Run your tapes from there. It's in a different geography than where your production servers are. You don't have to pay for the guy in the truck. Okay. Sorry, soapbox on that one. All right, if you want to learn more about the disaster recovery aspects as well as the virtualization stuff, that is in SVR 315. We're doing that session on Wednesday. All right, I think I'm close to time. I want to make sure we have some time for questions too, but we'll see how this goes. All right, so from a scalability perspective, I think I told you most of these already, 100 servers, 1,000 laptops, 2,000 databases. Some of the big things that I hopefully touched on a little bit today were around some of the auto enterprise scalability reliability features. Auto rerunning of jobs when the jobs fail. Auto healing for things like VSS. Automatically doing consistency checks. automatically protecting new SQL databases within an instance of SQL, so you don't have to keep going back for that. Auto-growing the storage. Auto-approving new content databases within SharePoint. So as that farm continues to organically grow, we'll continue to find those new databases and just protect them without a hitch, even without a requirement for it. Getting rid of a lot of the inconsistent replica error messages and just doing those consistency checks for you when they really are required. And then, more importantly than that, just getting rid of some of the verbosity of the error messages and just saying, you know what, there's a lot of noise. And in some cases, you saw all these error messages, and then 15 minutes later, we got it all cleaned up for you. But you still had to kind of mill through the error messages. So really just kind of making it a lot more of a fire and forget experience. All right, a couple key points. Some of the things that I hope you take away from the session today is around best for Windows file and application protection. It really is designed around virtualization. You're going to see more of that in the SVR 315 session. We talked about Windows clients a little bit around that backup and recovery while you're online and offline as far as scalability. So I do have just a few minutes left. So what I want to do is take you through in maybe about 60 seconds or so a couple different recovery scenarios to kind of give you a taste. Because admittedly, backup is cool. Restore is why we're here. So let's kind of talk about this. We're in the protection tab right now. Everything's kind of synced in. This is the stuff we were protecting earlier. I'm going to go over to my recovery tab. And I just want to gloss through a couple different experiences here. Certainly if I go out to a machine that's like an Exchange server, and I can go ahead and open that up, and I can see different kinds of data. Now I can see a storage group. So if I just go out to Exchange, and I double click on that, if I see a storage group like this, notice I've got a calendar-based view, and in here I've got bolded dates. I can go back and say, let's pick something from last month, so July 26th, and there is every 15-minute point in time. I am 3 or 4 mouse clicks in. I picked a database or storage group. I picked, and then from there I can pick a date and a time. Now if I pick a storage group, I'll see something like recover back the original instance of Exchange because that's where a storage group goes. I also can recover back to a network folder or to its own tape. If I were to go into that and see a database, same experience. I go back in that same UI where I just came from, but now I've got different options. Now I have options of, say, using the recovery database, the recovery storage group, or dropping it to a different Exchange server or a network folder to a tape. I can go into that again, and I can find mailboxes. Okay, now, here's the trick. It is not a supported operation to recover individual mailboxes or items back directly into an Exchange store. You need to recover the RDB or the RSG and then use the Exchange tools or third-party tools to do that. So I can choose a mailbox from here, but it's actually going to recover the database so that I can then use my Exchange tools to carry me the rest of the way. Now, here's the fun part. If I go and look at this, I found my mailbox, and it's pretty easy to find my mailbox because my storage group only has 3 users on it. Right? Anyone have here a storage group with 3 users? Just me? Okay. And the IT department, right? So, all right. So, over here in the search tab, I can search for files. I can search for SharePoint. I can search for Exchange. So I can say any Exchange mailbox that has the word Jason in it. It'd be good if I knew how to spell my own name. Go back a couple months and search. Remember I said DPM uses SQL Server as its search capability, so it's really quick as far as actually finding all the different recovery points. And from here I can right-click and I can go straight back into where I want to go. And as I mentioned, it's going to use the recovery database or recovery storage group to get that done. Now that's Exchange. If I go into SharePoint, who in here runs SharePoint 2007 or 2010 today? Okay, good. Okay, about 60% of the room. So for my SharePoint friends, I can go into a SharePoint. There's my farm. If I open this up, this will take a few seconds. Let's get one over here. There we go. SharePoint database. There's my site collection. There's my individual sites. And check this out. I can do item level recovery directly from my SharePoint farm. By the way, that is above and beyond the 2-stage recycle bin. And that's any item within the farm that's actually a physical object. All right, if I go to SQL, this is kind of my last example I want to kind of take you through. If I go to SQL, let's pick that accounting database. I mentioned payroll earlier. That was one of the ones we wanted to protect. And again, I can go back a couple months, and I can go ahead and say there's my every 15-minute point in time. So I can recover, say, the last day of the month that I've got, 5 o'clock, close of business. I can right-click that payroll database and say recover. And I'll always see these options for network folder. I'll always see the option for tape. But here I've got options like being able to recover directly back to a SQL database wherever it is on any SQL server that's out there. Now, a couple things that are important to note here. Remember I said we have a payroll database? Anyone in here ever have the accounting guy come up to you and say, hey, I need a copy of last month's tape? We're going to send it off? Yeah, okay. Just you and me. None of these other people have to deal with this. So one of my big pet peeves is when the accounting guy wants to come up and ask for that, because maybe he wants to send it off to the auditor, maybe it's supposed to go off to the vault, maybe it has to go to a judge. But whatever the case is, problem is once you give them that tape's got more on it than just the payroll database, right? And by the way, it may not be from exactly the point in time that we were doing. You saw what I did. I picked the payroll database to a date and a time, and I can recover that database by itself to just the point in time they need. And here's the fun part. I can recover that data to its own tape. It's not a typo. That's not recover from. That's recovered from. That's recover to. That's the tape that should go off to the auditor, to the vault, to a judge, whatever the case may be. All right. One of the last options for SQL. Notice that if I go all the way forward, I'm backing up that database right now. Let's see. Oh. Pick another one that's actually being protected right now. By the way, we didn't write MMC. We only write what relies on it. All right. Let me bring that back up. When I open up that SQL database, let's see, I think we said payroll. There we go. All right. Notice that above and beyond what was already available in the list, there's also an option for latest. And what latest means is that, let's say I have a scenario where I've got, if I'm protecting every 15 minutes, the worst case scenario is that 14 and a half minutes from now, that server's going to blow up. That's data DPM server doesn't have yet. What the word latest actually means is that in a single mouse click, just like you can pick a time, you can pick latest. And when you do that, what happens is after so let's say a server dies at 7:14 in the evening. DPM has the data up through 7 o'clock. We recover that. When you choose latest, what will happen is we will go ahead and play forward all the surviving transaction logs on that SQL server from 7:01 all the way up through 7:14. So within a single mouse click, you are within one committed transaction when that SQL server went down. And the only thing you had to do differently was to choose latest off the bottom of that pull-down list as opposed to picking a particular date or time. All right, what's left? All right, I think I'm actually technically out of time, but I want to cover you in 2 slides, and then we'll wrap up. I mentioned before that you push the same agent out everywhere. Okay. By the way, I'll tell you, I'm going to sound like a sales guy for about 30 seconds. Please forgive me. When you push the agent out everywhere, it doesn't mean you pay the same for every agent. Okay. You push the agent out everywhere because that's a deployment and operational benefit. The agent is actually appreciated based on 3 different tiers. There is, of course, the DPM server. You're going to need 1 or more of those within your environment. By the way, might write this down. You don't pay for the DPM server. Okay, if you have the agents, you get the server at no additional charge. So the way the agents work, if you put that agent down here in this corner, if you put that agent on a Windows client, XP, Vista, Windows 7, then when you start to protect data on that box, and not until then, so the agent, push it out everywhere, we don't charge you for it at all. When you start to protect the machines, if you're protecting a Windows client-based OS, we will call that a client data protection management license, or CDPML. You should just call it a client agent. I think it costs like around 30 New Zealand dollars-ish, maybe plus or minus a little bit. If you put that same agent on a Windows Server 2003 through 2008 R2, and the only thing you choose to protect on that server, regardless of what's running on it, the only thing you choose to protect on that box are files and directories, we will call that a standard DPML, Standard Data Protection Management License. No open file handlers, no volume licenses, anything like that. All right, lastly, if you put that same agent on that same Windows server, but instead of protecting a file, you protect a storage group or a database or a farm or a virtual machine, we will call that an enterprise data protection management license. EDPML, you should just call it an application agent. Okay? And in US dollars, to be clear, I think this is around 30-ish. This is around 140, and this is around 400 and some short change. So your salesperson will be more than happy to tell you exactly what those will cost for each of you. But here's the whole idea, is you push the agent out everywhere, and then based on what you choose to protect, we'll determine what the behavior is. And as I mentioned, if you own the agents, you get use rights for the server. Anyone else using something other than DPM that doesn't have to pay for their backup server? Just curious? Okay. NT backup does not count. All right. So, all right. Also, by the way, the agent technology is also available in the suites. So if you get the Enterprise System Center Management Suite, the DPM agent is part of it. If you are a mid-sized customer, the System Center Essentials Plus suite also gives you that same functionality as well. All right, this is my wrap-up slide, just to kind of tell you where we are and where we've been. This is our third generation of Windows-centric backup. We started off with DPM 2006, and it was a disk-to-disk only file-centric solution, really focused around centralized backup of branch offices. DPM 2007 was in market for about 3.5 years. It was included application protection as well as file, including Hyper-V. It included system state and bare metal recovery for Server 2003, and added tape support for the first time. And then where we are now, DPM 2010, added tape, added extensions for cloud capability, added client, added a lot of enterprise scalability. So this is kind of where we're headed. We started off with files and disks, solving an immediate problem across WAN connections. We went on for Windows servers and disk and tape, and now we're just kind of branching out and really just increasing the experience. It's really around broadening the how we protect as much as the what. As I mentioned, this is the first of 3 sessions on DPM. I hope this is what you wanted in a technical introduction to DPM as a 200-level session. Tomorrow we're going to keep on going and talking more about SharePoint and SQL as application servers, as well as disaster recovery and virtualization. So let's see. So I need to ask you at least one good question. Who in here already has more than say 50 servers being protected by DPM today? Okay, keep your hands up. 75. Okay, I still see 2 hands. 100 servers. Okay, how many servers have you got in your environment? 100 and how many? Very cool. And what workloads are you doing? What workloads are you protecting? Awesome. I'd like to give you a copy of my book. Come on up afterwards. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think, I don't know, how are we on time? I think we're like done, right? So I will take questions up here as we close down. Please make sure you fill out your evals. It's important. And thank you so much. Hope to see you later in the week. Thank you very much. Come on up and clap.